Happy almost Thanksgiving, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to a special pre-Thanksgiving live edition of the Liz Wheeler Show. It's a good day to be grateful. It's a good day to be thankful because President Trump has made what I would contend is the best nomination yet for a cabinet level position. Donald Trump has nominated to the position of head of NIH Dr. J. Bhattacharya, who, if you are not already familiar with this esteemed academic from Stanford, is one of the predominant voices who has been speaking against the COVID lockdowns and the vaccine mandates and the masking and all of the Fauci nonsense since day one. And now, not only has Trump elevated him to a position that's of equal stature to Dr. Fauci's. If Dr. Fauci had not retired, he would be Fauci's boss. So I want to start the show today by saying thank you, Mr. President. Thank you sincerely from the bottom of my heart. This is the kind of pick that makes me so energized to fight for these confirmations in the Senate. We are raring to go here on the Liz Wheeler Show. We are excited. And we're happy to see all of you joining on this live. Thank you for joining on YouTube, on Facebook, on X. It is delightful to see you all. I'm getting ready to celebrate Thanksgiving. I'm interested in a question, though, for you guys. Are you guys off today? Do you work today? Are you off just Thursday? It seems to me that it's kind of half and half. A lot of people are off Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Some people are just off Thursday. So if you're tuning in from work or if you're tuning in from your pre-Thanksgiving feasts, let me know. Hit me up in the chat here. My family celebrates Thanksgiving over a series of days because all of my siblings, everyone has commitments, to go to the in-laws at a certain time and go to my parents at a certain time. And so everyone kind of comes and goes all weekend and we just eat and eat and eat, which is fun. Really, really fun. So let me know what you guys are doing. And also, of course, how you're going to annoy your liberal cousins. Not that you should deliberately annoy them, but if the truth annoys them, can you really help that? Can you really control that? It's a great year I mean, Thanksgiving's always a good holiday. This year especially, I feel such a tremendous amount of gratitude that we are about to embark on the administration of President Donald Trump just after the new year. So we're going to talk about Trump's best move ever today. But we're going to start the show on a little bit of a somber note. There's been a report today that various members of Trump's incoming cabinet, these nominees, have been subject to bomb threats. They've been subject to swatting at their homes at the behest of leftists. Now, swatting is when someone falsely reports either a hostage situation or a kidnapping, and law enforcement responds by dispatching the SWAT team to the home that has been reported. Now, when there's a reported hostage situation or kidnapping, the police officers don't typically knock on the door. This is, cops in full SWAT gear going to the door trying to save someone's life if there's been a report that someone's life is in danger. So when it's a false threat and there's no expectation of law enforcement, you can understand how this is a very dangerous event. If cops barge into your home to try to rescue someone who doesn't need rescuing, you're not expecting it. Are shots going to be fired one way or the other? People's lives can be in danger. This is what the left is doing today because this is the left. The left claims that we, as conservatives, want civil war. The left claims that we, as conservatives, hate democracy. But who are the ones committing violence? They are. They're the ones who are committing violent acts when they lose an election. Not just lose the electoral count, which is still a valid loss, but lose the popular vote. They respond by putting people's lives in danger. This is the era that I am so looking forward to coming to a close in our nation, where the left thinks that they can abuse politicians, abuse Democrat politicians who don't enforce law and order in our country, because the people who are hurt the most by Democrat politicians not enforcing law and order are you and I. Conservatives, Christians, red-blooded Americans are the ones hurt when Democrat politicians refuse to enforce the law of the land, and this is no exception. That's the somber news of the day, but as you can see, I don't think I've been as delighted by an announcement ever in politics as I am by President Trump's announcement last night that he's nominated Dr. Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford to be head of the NIH. In fact, when I got the news, when I heard the announcement that President Trump was in fact going to make this nominee, which many of us had been strongly advocating for him to do, requesting him to do, felt like doing the Trump dance. felt like doing the Trump dance because this is the kind of nominee who is a disruptor. But if you know Dr. Bhattacharya, very interesting fact about him, he is one of the most mild mannered people that I've ever met. I call him a quiet alpha because he is exactly what you want a leader to be. You want a leader to be thoughtful. You want a leader to be present. You want a leader to be courageous in the face of dissent. You want a leader, you don't always want a leader to be bombastic. Sometimes the times call for that, but sometimes the people who are the strongest are the people who can be the quietest. And Dr. J. Bhattacharya is, if you watch interviews that he has done throughout the years, he's not always the one who's, throwing torches, but if you listen to his words, my goodness, are they savage. So I just want to start again and say thank you, President Trump. Thank you from those of us who have been eagerly awaiting the arrival of disruptors in Washington, D.C. We knew that you would come through, and we're very, very grateful that you've nominated Dr. J. Bhattacharya. And we are sitting here ready and waiting to defend him against the inevitable attacks that he is going to sustain from the left. This guy is extremely impressive. In October of 2020, Dr. J. Bhattacharya authored the Great Barrington Declaration. You remember this. This was a scientific thesis against the COVID lockdowns. And the reason Dr. Bhattacharya authored this was to dissent against the lockdowns that were sweeping across the United States. Take a listen to this.
Places that have followed such a strategy, Florida, Sweden, other places around the world, have done much better in terms of overall health outcomes than places that have had lockdown-focused strategies where the disease is spread anyways, but with catastrophic damage to the poor, working class. So going forward, my goal is going to be to help people understand that the lockdowns were an enormous, catastrophic mistake that should never be repeated. I believe that lockdowns should be seen as a dirty word, that when we think about lockdowns, we should recoil with horror, because what is the policies we followed have violated not just medical ethics, but also it's crushed the ability for scientists to discuss openly with each other facts and evidence. It's taken a great amount of effort, willingness to face abuse in order for scientists to speak up, and many have been silenced. So I think the restoration of the freedom for scientists to discuss with one another openly what the evidence actually says without this fear of repression that we've seen during the pandemic in order to support the lockdowns needs to end. I think that the proper place of science in society needs to be restored so that scientists can advise but not dictate policy. And then I believe that lockdowns themselves, once we have fully evaluated them, will be seen as a enormous mistake. So, and I hope so that we could, with my work, so that we never repeat it again.
How fired up do you feel that this guy's going to be the head of NIH? And you understand, I think you'll agree that my description of his character as a quiet alpha is apropos after listening to that. Let me tell you just a little bit about my relationship with Dr. J. Bhattacharya. I met Dr. Bhattacharya virtually early in 2020 when I lived in California at the time, and Governor Newsom was the first governor in the United States to impose lockdowns on people. I believe it was mid-March. It was either the 13th or the 19th. I always forget which day, but either March 13th or March 19th was the day that Governor Gavin Newsom locked down California. And we were told we were not allowed to leave our homes except for essential business. You were not allowed to work unless you were a quote unquote essential employee. I had to carry my press pass in my car during the first week of lockdowns because we weren't sure if we were going to be stopped in our cars just leaving the home, or were we going to be questioned? Were there going to be checkpoints? What was the situation going to be? I was categorized as an essential employee, and I give that an eye roll because, first of all, a member of the press, an essential employee, okay, but also not the government's job to determine who is quote unquote essential or not. Every job is essential to the person who is working it because they have to provide for their family. All that notwithstanding, I started reading the research, the very few papers that were available on lockdowns, on masks, on social distancing. I was searching on Twitter at the time. It was before they cracked down on the COVID information. They didn't for about another month. I started looking on Twitter and in obscure scientific blogs for any scientist, any epidemiologist who had evidence, who was conducting a study, or who was dissenting from these types of lockdowns. And I came across Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He had very courageously published an article stating that there was evidence that this was a mitigation tactic that was not only ineffective, but that was dangerous. He also challenged the World Health Organization, telling us that the case fatality rate for COVID was 3.6. And he said, the masking is not what they're portraying it to be. And I reached out to Dr. Bhattacharya because I wanted not just to read what he wrote, I wanted to talk to him, talk some of these things through. And he very graciously, almost immediately, responded to me, and we began corresponding about all things COVID. And he pointed me towards the real science, not the ideological propaganda that was masked as science, but the real evidence about, do masks prevent anything? This was before the vaccines, but do lockdowns stop the spread? Are these respiratory viruses actually a risk to younger healthy people? What are the high risk factors here? And he very graciously came on my show innumerable times to break down these really nitty-gritty scientific topics for all of us in a way that, even if we didn't exist in the academic sphere or in the scientific field, we could easily digest and understand, and therefore explain and defend and share with our family and friends. And I found him to be one of the most humble, but also one of the most confident and well-educated people. And one of the standards I use when I talk to people in this industry, I talk to all kinds of subject matter experts. And one of the tests that I use, or one of the screening tactics I use to tell whether someone's just bloviating, whether they're full of BS, or whether what they say is credible, is when they say something, especially something that's a little transgressive or dissenting from a popular narrative, or even just outright bombastic, is when you make this comment, when you present a proposition to me, do you immediately follow it up with the facts? So if he says lockdowns should be a dirty word, I like the sound of that. We should probably buy him a plaque in his new office that says lockdowns are a dirty word. Um, but when he says that, does he just say that because it's popular with half of the country, or does he have scientific evidence that backs that up? And every single time with this guy, his mind is like a steel trap. There is not a scientific study that I can ever think of that he did not know off the top of his head. He knew the year that it was published. He knew the authors. He knew the journal name in which it was published. And he substantiated every single one of his points with evidence to back up his points. And I thought, this guy's the real deal. You put him next to Fauci, and Fauci would just disintegrate like the Wicked Witch of the West. So that's been my interaction over the years with Dr. Bhattacharya. He is forever gracious. He's never gotten a big head, even as he's become a more prominent public figure in the United States. Which led, of course, his dissent led Dr. Fauci and Francis Collins, who was the previous head of the NIH, to send some really spicy emails about Bhattacharya. But thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, we have those emails, and we're going to talk about them in just a second. Today's episode is sponsored by First Cup Coffee. Go to firstcup.com, use my promo code Liz, and you can get 10% off your order. And make sure, guys, when you're on firstcup.com, go check out those coffee flavors. Those of you who are a fan of the movie 1776, who are a fan of American history, I think you're going to get a kick out of some of the flavors on firstcup.com. And if you use my promo code Liz, you can get 10% off your order or off your subscription. Just go to firstcup.com, use my promo code Liz. So just 2 days after Dr. Jay Bhattacharya authored the Great Barrington Declaration and published it, Francis Collins, then head of the NIH, emailed with his team. This was supposed to be a secret email. I guess he forgot that when you're a government employee, your emails are subject to the public eye if a citizen files a Freedom of Information Act request. Well, Francis Collins either didn't think that would happen, didn't care about it, or forgot about it, because he called Dr. Jay Bhattacharya a fringe epidemiologist. We're going to read this email here on the screen. You'll see this brought up in just a second here. I'm going to bring this up because it's quite striking that in this email, yeah, it is. I want to read the full email. So let me read up. He says, okay. Oh, there it is. This proposal, this is from Francis Collins to Fauci, says, this proposal, the Great Barrington Declaration, from the 3 fringe epidemiologists who met with the secretary, seems to be getting a lot of attention. and even a co-signature from a Nobel Prize winner, Mike Levitt at Stanford. There needs to be a quick and devastating published takedown of its premises. I don't see anything like that online yet. Is it underway? Signed, Francis. A quick and devastating takedown of the premise. The premise being that lockdowns are an ineffective strategy. And thus, of course, began the propaganda efforts that Fauci guided, telling us all that we must lock down or we're going to kill our grandmothers. I propose that we send Dr. Bhattacharya as a gift a little plaque for his door, his office door at NIH that says fringe epidemiologist, and then that meme with the glasses, and just so that he can remind everyone that this fringe epidemiologist not only took over Francis Collins's job, but he would be the boss of Dr. Fauci had Dr. Fauci not run from oversight the way that he did. Fauci, of course, also sent an email in response to Francis Collins's email saying, of course, he is strongly against the premises in the Great Barrington Declaration. But you'll notice that neither Francis Collins nor Anthony Fauci passed the test I just described a moment ago. Neither of them provide any evidence for their positions. They simply say, he's fringe. We need a devastating takedown. I'm strongly against the Great Barrington Declaration. But why, boys? Why? What evidence do you have that lockdowns are effective? Where's your scientific studies? Where's your epidemiological evidence? It doesn't exist because it's just ideological. Now, Bhattacharya explained exactly how it happened that people, men like Francis Collins and Dr. Fauci, came to be in charge of the public health administration in our country and came to be able to impose something like lockdowns on our entire nation, even as lockdowns are contrary to science. He said it's because there was a cartel of bureaucrats, scientific bureaucrats, who stood to benefit from this. Take a listen to this.
Scientific consensus in favor of them. That was a lie. There was never a scientific consensus on almost any of the topics. And as you say, on masks, in fact, the pre-existing narrative, the pre-existing idea among most scientists before the pandemic was quite the opposite direction. What happened was a relatively small group, a cartel almost, of very powerful scientific bureaucrats took over the whole apparatus of science, at least as far as the public eye was concerned, dominated the media, dominated the message to politicians. And as a result, we had a catastrophic response to COVID. And we're going to be paying the cost of that for a very long time.
And I think we are paying the cost of that, although some people on the left like to pretend we aren't. The result of this very measured, very logical, very evidence-based view is Dr. Jay Bhattacharya was censored on Twitter. This is, of course, pre-Elon Musk, pre-X. Dr. Bhattacharya was placed on a blacklist that after Elon bought Twitter and rebranded it X, you remember the Twitter files when Elon allowed reporters to come on to Twitter property and look at the behind the scenes at Twitter, look at what it looks like on the back end when you have a Twitter profile, look at the algorithm, look at the ideology embedded in Twitter rules and regulations. And you'll see that Dr. Bhattacharya was placed on a trends blacklist. So anytime Dr. Bhattacharya dissented from the Fauci narrative, and it would have otherwise organically trended so that people find out about it, he was blacklisted from being able to trend on Twitter. And it was only when Elon Musk bought X and personally invited Dr. Bhattacharya to come to Twitter, I think it was still Twitter at that point, Twitter headquarters, it hadn't yet been rebranded X, that Dr. Bhattacharya was like, wow, this is something that I face this. Now, think about COVID for a minute. Think about what state handled COVID the best. That state, of course, was Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis had the best COVID policies of the entire country, and he had the best outcome of the entire country, especially given the population demographics of Florida. I would argue he had the toughest state to deal with because so many elderly people live in Florida. The elderly were, of course, at somewhat higher risk than your average healthy younger adult or child from COVID. But nonetheless, Ron DeSantis refused to lock Florida down. He refused to impose mask mandates and vaccine mandates, and he still had the best outcome. And the reason that he implemented those policies in the face of all the pressure from the public health establishment was because he got on the phone with Dr. Bhattacharya. Take a listen to this.
Wrapping up, but I just want to know, what is your impression of Ron DeSantis, having interacted with him at least several times?
I mean, I've never met a politician like him. He's extraordinary. he called me out of the blue sometime in mid-September, like on a Sunday morning. I'm not sure exactly how I got my number, but he called me up, said, would you like to speak to Governor DeSantis? I said, okay. And he'd read we had a 2-hour conversation about COVID policy. This is September of last year, right? And he had read all the papers that I referenced, and not my work, but like lots and lots of other papers. He knew all of the details. It was a remarkable conversation. And then we had this like roundtable on September 25th with Martin and Mike Levitt, and with DeSantis leading it. And the next day he lifted most of the restrictions all across Florida. I mean, there's this like combination of like bravery, intellectual bravery, and also willingness to take a stand that and sort of knowledge that I've never seen in a politician before.
And there you go. Who was the one who influenced Ron DeSantis? It was Dr. Bhattacharya. Kudos to Governor DeSantis for reaching out to a doctor who was actually committed to real science and not ideology. So this is the statement that Trump posted when he nominated Dr. Bhattacharya to head of the NIH. He said, I'm thrilled to nominate Jay Bhattacharya to serve as director of the National Institutes of Health. Dr. Bhattacharya will work in cooperation with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to direct the national medical research and to make important discoveries that will improve health and save lives. Jay is a professor of health policy at Stanford University, a research associate at the National Bureau of Economics Research, and a senior fellow by courtesy at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research, Stanford Freeman Spogli Institute, and the Hoover Institution. He directs Stanford's Center for Demography and Economics of Health and Aging. His research focuses on health and well-being of vulnerable populations, emphasizing the role of government programs, biomedical innovation, and economics. Can you believe this guy's resume? Jay is co-author of the Great Barrington Declaration, an alternative to lockdowns proposed in October of 2020. His peer-reviewed research has been published in economics, statistics, legal, medical, public health, and health policy journals. He holds an MD and a PhD in economics from Stanford University. Together, Jay and RFK Jr. will restore the NIH to a gold standard of medical research as they examine the underlying causes of and solutions to America's biggest health challenges, including our crisis of chronic illness and disease. Together, they will work hard to make America healthy again. So then Dr. Bhattacharya responds to Trump's announcement of the nomination. And this is what he says. He says, I am honored and humbled by President Donald Trump's nomination of me to be the next NIH director. We will reform American scientific institutions so that they are worthy of trust again, and will deploy the fruits of excellent science to make America healthy again. And then RFK said, I'm so grateful to President Trump for this spectacular appointment. Dr. Bhattacharya is the ideal leader to restore NIH as the international template for gold standard science and evidence-based medicine. Guys, how excited do you feel? How excited do you feel that this guy is going to be in charge of NIH? And there are some naysayers online. I've seen you guys in the comment section saying, listen, does the head of NIH actually have any power, or is it just a figurehead at the top of the public health administration? And let me tell you, Google the budget of the NIH and then tell me how much influence Dr. Jay Bhattacharya will have in that position. Again, I just want to say thank you to President Trump. Thank you, Mr. President, for nominating Dr. Bhattacharya. We are so grateful. Maybe up there on my top 5 list of what I'm grateful for this Thanksgiving is this appointment. This is the kind of disruptor we are thrilled to see go into Washington, D.C., and we're excited to see what your administration, with Dr. Bhattacharya part of it, are going to do to the health crisis that we're facing in the United States. Okay, guys, did you see that video? This video has gone viral. It's actually quite bananas. This is Kamala Harris. Her team released a video and the official Democrat Party X account was promoting it. So this was not an obscure video that happened to go viral on X because someone saw it, thought it was nuts, and then it got shared from there. This is actually being pushed. It's being promoted by the Democrat apparatus itself. And it's not just weird that Kamala Harris made a video. She appears to be completely intoxicated in this video. I am not exaggerating. Take a look at it for yourself.
I just have to remind you, don't you ever let anybody take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th. And you have the same purpose that you did. And you have the same ability to engage and inspire. So don't ever let anybody or any circumstance take your power from you.
Who let that? Which member of her team was even willing to click the post button and post that publicly? Well, whoever it is must absolutely hate her. And I have a theory about why this video was posted, because I don't say this with personal animosity when I say she looks drunk. At least very, very hungover. Her face was puffy. Her hair was unkempt. She had big bags under her eyes. She was slurring her speech. She was hunched over. She looked awful. And that's objective analysis, regardless of what you think of her. Who on earth thought this video was a good idea, but who was willing to post this unless they absolutely hate her? But here's my theory about how this came to be. There was a report 2 days ago. This is from Politico, so a relatively reliable source, that Kamala Harris was interested in running for president again in 2028. It says Politico reports that Kamala has reportedly told her allies, "I am staying in the fight," and she's keeping her options open for 2028 regarding whether she might run for president again. So here's my theory. My theory is that the Democrat apparatus we know this part is not my theory. The Democrat apparatus is for a fact unhappy with Kamala Harris. They're unhappy with how she ran her campaign. They're unhappy that she lost. They're unhappy with how embarrassing she was. And I think the Democrat apparatus, this is my theory. They saw this report from Politico. Kamala Harris, as many politicians are, completely oblivious to the fact that no one likes her. Otherwise, she wouldn't have run in the first place, because the only reason she was vice president is because she is Black and a woman, and Joe Biden picked her as a double token. The Democrat primary voters back in 2019, during that primary when she was running against Joe Biden, hated her. She dropped out before Iowa because she got, 2 or 3% of the Democrat vote. The Democrats themselves rejected her. She's completely oblivious to the fact that she is totally disliked. She's a very uncomfortable person, a very incompetent person, a very dangerous person. So she's so oblivious that she says, okay, well, I might run again in 2028. I'm just going to blame my loss on the fact that Joe Biden didn't drop out until the end of July. I had 100 days to run, and that's why I failed. And the Democrat apparatus is like, oh, no, you don't. No, you don't. And so they encourage her to post this because they know that this is the kill shot for her political career. She will never, ever, ever be able to run successfully for office ever again, thanks to this video. Because it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, doesn't matter if you're Republican, doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal. You look at this and you're like, oh, that lady needs to go to rehab. Turns out the Kamala Harris campaign did a little introspection, but publicly. They wanted to do an autopsy of her campaign with some Democrat commentators and Democrat podcasters. So some of her campaign strategists, her campaign director, and David Plouffe, who was part of her campaign strategy team, went on Pod Save America, which is the Obama campaign bros. They have their podcast. And they were analyzing what they did right, what they did wrong about her campaign. Well, it turns out they admitted on this podcast that the entire Kamala campaign was fake. They were lying to the public because their internal polling, they said, always showed Kamala Harris to be behind. They never produced an internal poll that showed her to be leading anywhere in any of the battleground states, any of the key areas, or in overall polls. And yet we were constantly hearing from their campaign surrogates during the campaign that she was ahead, which means they were lying. Take a listen.
When we got in, my recollection is some of that snapped back, but we were behind. I mean, I think it surprised people because there was these public polls that came out in late September, early October, showing us with leads that we never saw. I mean, it was just basically a race that in the battlegrounds was 46, 47, 47, 48. So that's not where we started. We started behind. She was able to climb out. I think even after the debate, we might have gained 0.51. It wasn't a race that moved a lot. And so I think when you think about our own internal analytics, if you have Wisconsin at 47, 47, or Pennsylvania 48, 47 Trump, let's say, which I think is where we had it at the end, you've got to have undecided break your way more than your opponents. And you've got to get a little benefit from turnout, which we weren't able to do.
So their internal polling showed that they were behind, and yet publicly they were pretending they were ahead. So what does that mean? It means they lied. It means the Kamala campaign was fake. This is why the Democrat apparatus doesn't want her. She's a liar. She's just a terrible politician. They don't want her to run again, even as she says so self-servingly she's keeping her options open for 2028. And they're like, yeah, no, you're not. Go ahead out there and show what a wino you are. Jen O'Malley also blamed the loss, believe it or not, this is probably the funniest of all, blamed the loss on the mainstream media. That's right, the media that was obviously entirely in Kamala Harris's pocket. They were her propagandists to the extreme, but it's the media's fault, according to Jen O'Malley, that Kamala Harris lost. Take a look at this.
I would say, I mean, look, I am not media hater by any measure, and I think that, you know, we women don't get far in life talking about double standards, so that's not the point. But
Is there
I do
ever
think
a
a
leftist
narrative,
female politician who doesn't bring up some
107
kind of
days,
sexism?
2 weeks f***ed up because of a hurricane, 2 weeks talking about how she didn't do interviews, which, you know, she was doing plenty, but we were doing in our own way. We had to, you know, be the nominee, had to find a running mate and do a rollout. I mean, there was all these things that you kind of want to factor in, but real people heard in some way that we were not going to have interviews, which was both not true and also so counter to any kind of standard that was put on Trump that I think that was a problem. And then on top of that, we would do an interview, and to Stephanie's point, the questions were small and processy and about like
dumb.
They were not informing a voter who was trying to listen to learn more or to understand. And I'm not here to say that you know the whole system was focused on us incorrectly. I'm just saying, like, again, of the things we need to explore as we move forward as a campaign and as a country, that does a disservice to voters. And, you know, I think back and think we should have signaled more of our strategy early on about podcasts and who we were trying to reach. But we had a limited amount of time to reach the people we were trying to reach, and we were trying to go to them. But being up against a narrative that we weren't doing anything or we were afraid to have interviews is completely bullshit, and also like took hold a little bit. And we just gave us another thing we had to fight back for that Trump never had to worry about.
Wait a second here. First of all, go ahead and raise your hand in the chat if you're one of those real people. She said real people heard this false narrative that Kamala Harris was not doing as many interviews as JD Vance and Trump. Real people heard that. You raise your hand if you're one of those real people that heard that. And I'll tell you why we heard that. We heard that because it was true. We heard that. Trump never had to deal with this, she said, suggesting that there was a double standard based on the fact that Kamala Harris was a woman. No, Trump never heard that criticism because Donald Trump is always willing to do interviews. He does more interviews than anyone, except maybe JD Vance, who did more interviews than I have ever seen a vice presidential running mate do in my entire life. These people, the Trump Vance campaign were on every single show, every single weekend, and Kamala Harris went on one interview, which was only one that wasn't an open propagandist. And that was when she went on Fox News and talked to Bret Baier. And when he asked her real questions about her record as border czar and her record going after pro-lifers, she freaked out so bad that her staff, probably these people that you just heard, her staff behind the scenes off air was going like this to Bret Baier. Cut the interview. Stop. We got to wrap. Time's up, they said. And he had to stop the interview early because they were freaking out so badly at Kamala Harris's incompetence when she was asked actual real questions, which Bret Baier was asking her perfectly fair questions about her record as vice president, as senator, and as attorney general of California. But listen, I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't watching this unfold with a bit of delight in my eyes, because it's fun for once to see Democrats implode, a Democrat campaign fail, and Democrat miscalculations, because their policies are so evil when they're imposed on us. I do rejoice when they fail. Okay, some headlines for today. The Baltimore City School District is admitting that they teach 6-year-olds about gender identity and specifically about genitalia. Keep in mind, 6-year-olds, I mean, these are little boys and girls that don't have their front teeth. These are tiny little children who still want their mother during the day at school. This is from Fox Baltimore. It says Baltimore City schools teach first graders about gender identity and genitalia, third graders about the LGBT pride flag, and fourth graders about sexual confusion. This, according to a sex education curricula reviewed by a group called Spotlight on Maryland. City schools use the Maryland Rights, Respect, and Responsibilities curriculum. It's called the 3 R's, which is ironic because the 3 R's used to be reading, writing, and arithmetic. In elementary and middle schools, though parents have the option to opt their children out of the sex education course. But what average parent knows that rights, respect, and responsibilities is not only graphic sex ed, but teaches your child the transgender ideology. It's so deceptive. It's so disgusting. It's so demonic. Maryland 3R's curriculum, according to Fox Baltimore, is posted online by its author, Advocates for Youth. But Spotlight on Maryland obtained details about the curricula through a public records request for sex education curriculums used by Baltimore City Public Schools at all grade levels since January 1st of 2020. The district required Spotlight on Maryland to visit its office in person to review the high school curricula under staff supervision. The Maryland 3R's curriculum directs teachers to describe the concept of gender identity to first graders, which is consistent with state health education guideline. This is what a lesson plan, an example lesson plan says. Put the sign that reads gender identity up or write the phrase on the board. Ask students to repeat it with you. Point out that the word identity begins with an I. Say something like identity starts with an I. That's how you can remember it. I feel, I know. Gender identity is that feeling of knowing your gender. You might feel like you're a boy. You might feel like you're a girl. You might feel like you're a boy, even if you have body parts that some people might tell you are girl parts. You might feel like you're a girl, even if you have body parts that some people might tell you are boy parts. And you might not feel that you're a boy or a girl, but you're a little bit of both. No matter how you feel, you're perfectly normal. That's being taught to first graders in Maryland. Another first grade lesson plan teaches 6-year-olds about their genitalia, which includes showing them a video that displays naked diagrams of boys and girls. Teachers are advised in the lesson to use gender-neutral language when describing body parts. It gets more graphic than that, and I will spare you. But let me just say this. If you are a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle of a child in a public school district, it doesn't even matter if you're in Baltimore, it doesn't matter if you're in Maryland, anywhere across the country, you make a similar request to your public school district and you even if they require you to go in person under teacher supervision to look at this curriculum, you look at every single page, every single picture, every single description, every single lesson plan, and my guess is that you will be shocked. The left are perverts. They're demonic. They are deliberately confusing and indoctrinating our children in downright evil ideology. It's despicable. Thank goodness there are some people, though, and this is our next headline, who understand that your identity, the identity that actually matters, is your identity in Christ. Jaden Ivey, an NBA player, was asked after he made a game-winning basket at the end of the game, he was asked about his identity as a basketball player and about that shot. And this was his response. I was floored when I watched this.
You know, we wanted to take the last shot before I actually, even did the play. I was just talking to Jesus, man. I'm like, Lord, just do something special. And he delivered, gave me the strength to go out there, execute the last play. And then, we won the game. It was exciting, great feeling. Yeah, I think it's easy to get lost, in this game, just the identity piece, whether or not you win games or, changing your role. I think it's key to know who you are as a person, because, I hit the shot today, I could miss, go 0 for 10. Next game, God willing, that doesn't happen, but, I could, tear my ACL a week from now, and, season's over. But your identity in Christ is really what matters at the end of the day, because, this game's going to pass away. When it's all said and done, when it's, your time's up, it's you stand in front of a holy God, and he's so loving, and, he wants to accept you, and he already loves you, and he's given, a lot of grace to you, because he died on the cross and took, sin away, so that we can be in heaven with him forever. So I really believe that, and I stand for that. And, throughout, all last year, it's important to really have that identity and know who you are.
And that's the identity. Does that warm your heart? That's the identity that matters. That is the identity that matters. You don't hear that often from professional sports players or people in the public eye. And I thought, man, this guy's putting it out there. Jaden Ivey from the Detroit Pistons. And I thought that's the most wonderful thing that I've heard in a long time. Imagine if we taught this in public schools versus gender identity nonsense. Vamp Fashions said on YouTube chat, didn't it used to involve immediate scorn, community shunning, arrest, demeaning trial, and jail for showing sexual images to kids? Now we pay these people to be teachers? Yeah, exactly. That's how twisted our culture has become. And that's the people that's what should happen. What should happen to people that teach kids about perverted sex stuff is they should face trial. They should be socially ostracized, but instead they're in our public schools. Our next headline is John Kerry. John Kerry is about 1,000 years old. I mean, he's as old. He's the fossil he claims that the climate is coming after. At Harvard Kennedy School, he's not only continuing to call for censorship and tyranny, he says that we are on the brink of needing to declare a climate emergency, the implications of which we will discuss in just a moment. Take a listen to this.
So I think personally we're on the brink of needing to declare a climate emergency, which is what we really have. And we need to get people to behave as if this really is a major transitional challenge to the whole planet, to everybody. People in Africa don't have electricity, need to choose the right kinds of electricity. And we need to help them be able to afford it and do it. We are the largest economy in the world, $24 trillion or $23 trillion economy, maybe more by now. The next closest is China at about 18 trillion. And the next closest to the two of us, Germany and Japan at 4 trillion. That's how far it drops down. You don't think we have some sort of obligation out of that to be responsible? I think you do. But I'm just saying that our country needs to talk about this. And we need to make it happen because we're paying huge sums of money to make up the difference.
Possum Fred says John Kerry needs to transition to retired. Yeah, he's like 80 years old now. He's as old as all the Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, this dinosaur class of politician. Thank goodness in like 5 years they're not going to be in charge of any position. They're not going to be in any position of power in charge of any parts of our lives anymore. But think about the implications of what he's saying. He talks about this $24 trillion economy. Well, this is not some intangible thing that he's discussing. That's your money and my money. It's how much our businesses are worth, how much we have in our savings account, how much are in our paychecks every week. He's lumping that in to make it seem like it's this thing that's separate from us, this inanimate object, and it's not. What he wants to do is he's calling for the redistribution of wealth. He wants to take your money and he wants to be the sole decider of what happens to that money, and he wants to give it to foreign countries for what? Not for personal charity. He wants to give it to foreign countries, requiring them to use it on so-called climate change initiatives. Now, the premise of the left's climate change agenda, their climate crisis cries, is that we can't have any carbon emissions, otherwise the Earth is going to end, but there's no science backing that up. They want to move us to a zero carbon world, but what does that mean? It means they don't want us to have gasoline-powered engines. They don't want us to heat our homes with electricity. They don't want us to use any coal. They don't want us... If we abolished fossil fuels, which is essentially what a zero-carbon economy would look like, we would have nothing. All of our clothes are made from petrochemicals. Our medicine is made of petrochemicals. The pesticides and fertilizers used to make our food and make it something that is... Make food growable in different climates all around the world. If we abolish fossil fuels, that would be gone. People would starve. We would have nothing. If we relied on what? Solar and wind power? First of all, if we relied on wind power, those huge windmills, do you know the amount of fossil fuel needed to make those and erect them and oil them and keep them working for the short 20-year lifespan that they have? If you abolish fossil fuels, we will, this is not an exaggeration, this is not hyperbolic, we will return to pre-industrial revolution poverty. People's health will decline. Our standard of living will decline. People will not just lose their job. They will not just be forced to drive old cars and wear old clothes. They will die. And that's what John Kerry wants, because he's totally fine. He'll just take his private jet to whatever country is still prosperous enough that can get him whatever clothes he wants, whatever homes he wants, and whatever medicine he needs. But in the meantime, he needs people to behave in order to get this done. This guy is demonic. All right, this is an interesting, our next headline. This is an interesting map. If you look at the map state by state of the United States post-election, and you compare the number of Republicans that, or the number of people that voted Republican in 2020 to the number of people that voted Republican in 2024, every single state in our country, with zero exceptions, is more Republican now than it was in 2020. Every single state is redder than it was in 2020. Look at that. And some of the most liberal states, California and New York, are the most along that spectrum, meaning they had more people that voted Republican this time around, voted Trump this time, than even some of the red states. They had more people converted than even some of the other red states. This is wonderful news. Wonderful news. This is what we should hang on our walls. I saw on X somebody selling Christmas ornaments. That's the electoral map. This should be one too. You should make this into a Christmas ornament. I think that would sell. All right. Leftists, of course, are having a hard time with the idea of President Trump as president. You know, the economy is going to be so prosperous that instead of working or struggling to protect their families, they're able to spend their time holding events to scream their rage. That's how prosperous they are, that people have the luxury to do this. And they don't even realize that this is a luxury, because in an actual third world country, if we actually had a dictator or an authoritarian in charge, you would be executed for criticizing the leader of the country in this manner. But not only are they perfectly safe, they have the financial means to take time away from providing for their family, making money, to put food on the table, to do this. This is their screaming event, venting their rage. Do we have a video of this, Tim? Oh yeah, we're bringing up a video of this. If I had to watch it, you have to watch it. This is the left screaming in rage at Donald Trump's elections. I find this to be very entertaining. I feel no shame whatsoever in delighting in the other side's consternation, because there are certain people of the independent mindset, the centrist mindset. Absolutely. Be gracious with them. They'll convert. But then there are some people, it doesn't matter how gracious you are, they're not going to convert. So you might as well enjoy their fits of rage. Here you go. The funniest part of that that's good, Tim. I think we're good. The funniest part of that is the people that are so self-serving. They're literally screaming and rage, but they're holding up a cell phone taking a selfie video because they want to make sure to document this. They want to make sure that you see that they're virtue signaling and how upset they are. Talk about narcissism. Talk about, like I said, the thing that always strikes me about these people are your freedom of speech is so protected. You are so secure in your ability to dissent from the leader of our country that you're not at all worried that this might be dangerous, because it's not. And it shouldn't be. You are perfectly safe and secure to criticize any politician in any way you want. And you also have the financial luxury to take time away from your job and go to the shores. What was this, Lake Michigan? It's Lake Michigan. Go to the shores of Lake Michigan and scream your anger out into the void. Listen, scream away. Scream away. It does nothing but fuel us. It does nothing. Like, I'm all about trying to convert family members if their political views have strayed a little to the left. But there are certain people, I don't know if that's if reasoning is what's going to convert them. I don't know. Maybe you guys are better people than I am. Maybe you have a way that you can say, listen, we see those people screaming in rage on the shore of Lake Michigan, and we know how to convert them. Be my guest. Be my guest. All right, guys. On this note, drop in the chat box if you have any plans on how to interact with your leftist relatives on Thanksgiving. Are you going to talk about politics? Are you going to talk about Donald Trump? Are you going to talk about his unity ticket, Tulsi Gabbard and RFK and Elon Musk? Are you going to talk about Kamala Harris? And if so, what are you going to say? And how does your family handle this? Is your family like, no politics, no religion, no controversial topics? Or is your family all about the conversation? My family's all about the conversations. I can't say in my immediate family, we don't have any leftists that I'm aware of. Everyone is pretty logical and sensible. In my extended family, there's a bit of everything. But we talk about everything in my family, and I think most people are fine with it. There are a few people that are like, I can't, I won't. You guys are terrible. They're still welcome. Turkey for everybody. They're still welcome. Paul says, just stay cool. Erica says, we're all conservatives. That's nice. Good job, whoever your parents are, if your entire family is conservative. All right, guys, happy Thanksgiving. We will be back here at our regularly scheduled time on Friday, so don't forget to tune in. I have some special content created for you for the day after Thanksgiving. I have. Don't forget to go to firstcup.com. Use my promo code Liz to get 10% off your order. They're a great sponsor. They stand with us. So make sure that you support them in return. Grab a bag of coffee. You might need it over the weekend. Firstcup.com, promo code Liz to get 10% off your order. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you for listening. I hope you have a happy, happy Thanksgiving. I know I'm grateful for you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I'm Liz Wheeler. This is The Liz Wheeler Show.